Publicly shamed by my rival, my silent revenge plan made him beg for mercy. They said true humiliation was a unique fire, one that burned away everything a person thought they were, leaving only the barest, most primal core. He remembered the exact moment that fire engulfed him. The Innovate-Con summit, the grand stage, the expectant faces of investors and publishers, all turned to a sea of mocking laughter and dismissive murmurs. His groundbreaking narrative-driven game, the culmination of years of relentless dedication and countless sleepless nights, had just crashed spectacularly. Error messages, garbled graphics, a digital cacophony of failure. And there, in the front row, Thorne, his perfectly coiffed hair gleaming under the stage lights, a triumphant, sneering grin plastered across his face. He chuckled, a low, guttural sound that seemed to echo through the silence of Orion's shattered dreams, and openly mocked his amateurish work. The stage lights, once a beacon of hope, now felt like an interrogation lamp, mercilessly highlighting his failure. A tremor ran through Orion's hands, though he gripped the podium, trying to steady himself. The air, thick with the scent of anticipation moments before, now reeked of pity and contempt. His eyes, trained on the projector screen, watched as lines of code, once meticulously crafted and elegant, writhed into an unholy tangle of digital noise. The vibrant, breathing world he had poured his soul into, designed to evoke profound empathy and challenge perspectives, was now a pixelated corpse, twitching with the final spasms of a fatal error. A cold sweat beaded on his forehead, tracing paths through the dust of shattered ambition. Perhaps, Orion, Thorne drawled, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the panel, a practice stage whisper designed for maximum impact. Some artists are simply meant for the indie circuit, not the grand stage. A ripple of laughter, a dismissive shake of heads from the panel. Their faces, previously attentive, now wore expressions of disappointment, quickly morphing into disdain. Orion's reputation, his dreams, his very future, crumbled before his eyes, reduced to digital dust on a projector screen. It was a public shaming of epic proportions, designed to be swift, brutal, and irreversible. They saw a man defeated, his spirit broken. But in that moment, as the humiliation washed over him, a strange calm settled deep within his core. It wasn't resignation. It was something far more potent, far more dangerous. It was a cold, calculated resolve, an understanding that Thorne had just ignited a war he could not possibly comprehend. They thought it was over. Orion knew, with absolute certainty, it was only just beginning. And he held a secret, a nascent whisper of knowledge, that would soon turn Thorne's victory into his undoing. Before that fateful day, his world was a canvas of code and story. He was Orion, a name few knew outside the small, fervent circles of indie game development, but one that represented an unwavering commitment to innovation and narrative depth. His earliest memories were of tinkering, not with toys, but with the innards of old computers, fascinated by the logic and language hidden beneath the plastic shells. He had stumbled into game development almost by accident, initially drawn to the intricate problem-solving, but quickly captivated by the profound potential of interactive narratives. His latest project was more than just a game. It was a living, breathing world, a testament to the power of interactive storytelling. He had poured his heart and soul into it, every line of code, every character arc, every branching dialogue option meticulously crafted. The game explored themes of memory, identity, and the subjective nature of truth, challenging players to navigate a fragmented world where every choice reshaped their reality. He envisioned it as a digital tapestry, woven with threads of player agency and emotional resonance. There were days, weeks even, where he survived on instant coffee and the sheer force of will, driven by the belief that this game, this narrative experience, could truly resonate with players on a profound level. He saw games not just as entertainment, but as an art form, a medium capable of evoking empathy, challenging perspectives, and forging deep emotional connections. His apartment became his sanctuary, a fortress of solitude where the hum of his powerful workstation was the constant soundtrack to his relentless pursuit of perfection. He'd sacrificed social life, personal comfort, even basic routine, all for this vision. It was a lonely path, but it was his, and he walked it with an unshakable conviction, often finding solace in the quiet hum of his server racks, each blinking light a tiny affirmation of progress. Thorne, on the other hand, was the antithesis of everything Orion believed in. He was the charismatic and ruthless CEO of Nexus Gaming, a titan in the industry, known for churning out commercially successful, yet artistically hollow, titles. Nexus Gaming's output was predictable: high-budget, mass-marketed first-person shooters or generic open-world RPGs, designed to appeal to the lowest common denominator and maximize microtransaction revenue. Their games were polished, visually stunning, but utterly devoid of soul, existing merely as vehicles for monetization. Their paths had crossed before, in fleeting, almost inconsequential ways. He remembered one specific encounter from years ago, when Orion was part of a small, ambitious tech startup developing an innovative distributed ledger system. Thorne had attempted to acquire them, not because he saw their intrinsic value, but to strip mine their technology and absorb their talent into his corporate machine. Thorne, radiating an oily charm, had presented a ridiculously low offer, accompanied by thinly veiled threats about market realities and the inevitable crushing of small players by industry giants. Orion, a junior developer at the time, had sat in that sterile conference room, observing Thorne's dismissive body language, the way his eyes seemed to appraise people solely by their net worth. He had seen through Thorne's casual disregard for anyone who didn't fit into his corporate machine, anyone who prioritized innovation over pure profit. That encounter left a bitter taste, a quiet certainty that their values were fundamentally incompatible. Thorne chased profit and power. Orion chased innovation and connection. Their rivalry wasn't just professional. It was ideological, a clash between the soulless corporation and the passionate creator. Orion had been aware of Thorne's predatory nature for years, observing his company's growth with a detached vigilance. He built his empire not on genuine creativity, but on aggressive marketing, leveraging industry connections, and, Orion suspected even then, questionable ethical practices that skirted the very edge of legality. Thorne was a master manipulator, a showman who could charm investors and audiences alike, while simultaneously pulling strings behind the scenes to eliminate perceived threats. He remembered reading whispers on obscure forums, buried deep beneath layers of corporate PR, about Nexus Gaming's dubious user data practices even years ago, dismissed by the mainstream as mere conspiracy theories. But Orion's mind, always seeking the truth behind the facade, had stored those whispers away, adding them to the growing profile he subconsciously built of Thorne and his empire. Orion's secret weapon wasn't a hidden ally or a forgotten skill. It was a deeper, more fundamental understanding of the digital world than Thorne could ever grasp. His mind worked in layers, not just on the surface level of user experience, but delving into the very architecture of systems, the underlying protocols, the hidden pathways where data flowed. He had a particular fascination, a unique aptitude, for identifying vulnerabilities, exploits, and backdoors within complex software structures. It was a quiet skill, one honed over years of obscure side projects, and an insatiable curiosity about how things truly worked, rather than just how they appeared to. He'd spent countless hours studying the nuances of network security, the intricacies of server-client communication, the subtle fingerprints left by different development methodologies. This wasn't about hacking in the crude sense, not about breaking in. It was about analysis, dissection, understanding a system better than its creators themselves, understanding its fundamental logic and inherent weaknesses. Orion knew that every piece of software, no matter how robust, had a theoretical weak point, a potential entry that, if understood precisely, could be exploited. Thorne, in his arrogance, relied on teams of developers and layers of security, but Orion knew those layers were often built upon foundational assumptions that could be challenged. Thorne built a fortress. Orion sought the forgotten, hidden passage. He viewed software less as rigid code and more as an evolving ecosystem, constantly shifting, revealing its secrets to the patient and observant mind. He had started preparing for Innovate-Con months in advance, not just refining his game, but subtly observing Thorne's public-facing digital infrastructure. It was a habit, a curious mind at work, a quiet background process running in his thoughts. He noticed patterns, certain idiosyncratic coding signatures that, to an untrained eye, meant nothing, but to his, hinted at familiar, yet subtly flawed, underlying frameworks. He had seen them before in other Nexus gaming products, signs of rushed development or over-reliance on a specific, proprietary library that he knew had its own set of peculiarities. Orion couldn't have known Thorne would specifically sabotage him, not with certainty, but he knew Thorne's MO. He knew Thorne was the type to seek any advantage, ethical or not. His preparation wasn't for defense, but for comprehension. The very qualities that made him an unassuming indie developer. His meticulous nature, his deep dive into obscure technical details, his patience for long-term analysis, were precisely what would become his most potent offense. Thorne believed he had crushed Orion's spirit. He was wrong. He had merely provided him with the ultimate case study, the perfect test subject for his unique set of skills. The game had just begun, and only one of them truly understood the rules. In the aftermath of Innovate-Con, the public shaming was complete. The industry pundits, once cautiously optimistic about his innovative project, now spoke of him with a pitying tone, or worse, outright dismissal. Social media was awash with memes and cynical comments about indie developers who can't handle the big leagues. Headlines screamed about narrative disaster and Innovate-Con's biggest flop. The digital echo chamber amplified Thorne's narrative, painting Orion as an idealistic but ultimately incompetent dreamer. Thorne, of course, capitalized on it, giving interviews where he subtly, yet effectively, reinforced the narrative of Orion's amateurish failure, always careful to couch his jabs in feigned concern. "It's a shame, really," he'd say with a practiced sigh, his eyes shimmering with false empathy, "when passion isn't matched by professionalism. We at Nexus Gaming truly believe in supporting emerging talent, but some risks, well, they just don't pay off." He even extended a condescending offer to mentor Orion, sending a formal email that felt less like an olive branch and more like a victory lap. The message, filled with corporate platitudes, offered a consulting role within Nexus Gaming, a clear attempt to absorb and neutralize him, to transform his innovative spirit into another cog in Thorne's profit machine. Orion didn't lash out. He didn't defend himself. He didn't engage in the public spectacle. They expected a meltdown, a desperate plea for understanding, a bitter rant. They got silence. His shame, that initial searing humiliation, quickly transformed into something else entirely, a cold, calculated resolve. He retreated, not into despair, but into the quiet sanctuary of his apartment, the same space where he had birthed his dreams. Only this time, the hum of his workstation wasn't for creation, but for dissection. He cleared away the half-empty coffee cups and the scattered notes for his game, replacing them with stacks of technical documents, analyst reports, and publicly available data on Nexus Gaming. The air in the room, once alive with creative energy, now crackled with a different kind of intensity, the methodical focus of a predator. His focus shifted entirely. Thorne's upcoming flagship game, Apex Dominion, was a highly anticipated title, projected to be a massive success, a culmination of years of hype and a colossal marketing budget. It was Thorne's magnum opus, the jewel in Nexus Gaming's crown, a sprawling online multiplayer experience promising unprecedented immersion and dynamic player interactions. Orion began his analysis, not from the outside, not as a casual observer, but with the meticulous precision of a surgeon. He acquired every piece of public-facing information, marketing materials, developer interviews, technical white papers released during its development, even snippets of code that had been inadvertently exposed through various betas and promotional content. He trawled through developer forums, bug reports, and even employee reviews, searching for any hint of internal pressure, design compromises, or underlying architectural choices. He built a comprehensive digital profile of Apex Dominion, piecing together its architecture like a master puzzle solver, each fragment of data a clue, each line of exposed code a breadcrumb leading deeper into Thorne's digital fortress. His weeks turned into a blur of intense concentration. The hours dissolved into a seamless continuum of data streams and logical pathways. He delved into the core architecture of Apex Dominion, line by line, protocol by protocol, server configuration by server configuration. Thorne, in his arrogance, had outsourced components, relied on proprietary frameworks, and pushed his development teams to meet impossible deadlines. These were the cracks Orion sought. He discovered not one, but a series of interconnected vulnerabilities, deeply hidden within the game's core architecture. It was like finding a network of subterranean tunnels beneath a seemingly impenetrable fortress. One specific exploit, however, stood out. It wasn't a simple bug. It was a systemic flaw, a foundational weakness related to how the game handled persistent player data and online synchronization. It was designed to optimize performance at scale, to handle millions of concurrent users without lag. But in doing so, it created a blind spot, a critical vulnerability that, if triggered correctly, could not only cripple the game's online functionality, but also expose something far more damning: Thorne's unethical data collection practices. He remembered those subtle coding signatures he'd observed months prior, the ones that hinted at a familiar, flawed framework used by Nexus Gaming across many of their titles. Now they screamed. Thorne wasn't just collecting anonymous telemetry. He was harvesting granular player data, linking it to real-world identities through thinly veiled EULAs, and likely selling it to third parties, all without explicit, informed consent. Orion traced the data pathways, saw how player actions, in-game purchases, even chat logs, were being aggregated and cross-referenced with external data sources, creating shockingly detailed profiles of individual users. It was a vast, sprawling web of data exploitation, cloaked under layers of legal jargon and obfuscated code. This wasn't just unethical, it was potentially illegal, a time bomb that threatened his entire company and career. A cold surge of vindication ran through him, quickly replaced by a deeper, more profound sense of purpose. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about revealing a truth Thorne desperately wanted to keep hidden. His plan wasn't about public confrontation, not in the traditional sense. It wasn't about yelling or arguing or debating. It was about orchestrating Thorne's downfall in a way that would leave him begging for mercy, not from Orion, but from the very system he had exploited, from the very public he had defrauded. A silent, precise strike, timed perfectly to coincide with Thorne's game launch, would be the only true revenge. He thought Orion was broken. He thought Orion was irrelevant. He thought he had won. Orion merely watched, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to prove Thorne spectacularly wrong. Every silent hour spent dissecting his code, every hidden vulnerability Orion unearthed, felt like a chisel chipping away at the foundations of Thorne's empire. Thorne, in his relentless pursuit of power and profit, had created the very weapon that would bring him down, and Orion was the one who would wield it. The days leading up to the launch of Apex Dominion were a strange mixture of anticipation and meticulous execution for Orion. For Thorne, it was a triumphal march. Thorne was everywhere, on primetime talk shows, his face beaming from giant billboards in every major city, gracing the covers of industry magazines with headlines like "The future of gaming is here" and "Thorne's digital revolution." He reveled in the spotlight, dismissing any lingering doubts about his company's practices with practiced ease. Innovation, he'd declare, his voice resonating with false sincerity, sometimes requires pushing boundaries, venturing into uncharted digital territories. He spoke of Apex Dominion not just as a game, but as a revolution, an unprecedented leap in online gaming, fueled by cutting-edge data analytics, a phrase that now made Orion subtly clench his jaw. Thorne was so utterly consumed by his impending triumph that he wouldn't have noticed Orion, even if Orion had been standing right beside him. His silence, his complete absence from public discourse, was exactly what Thorne expected from a broken man. Thorne saw it as weakness, a confirmation of his dominance. Orion saw it as camouflage, the perfect cover for a precise strike. Orion worked in absolute secrecy, refining the trigger mechanism for the exploit, ensuring its execution would be flawless and untraceable to him. It wasn't a virus or malware in the traditional sense. It was a cleverly constructed data packet designed to interact with Thorne's vulnerable synchronization protocol in a very specific way. When deployed, it wouldn't just crash a system. It would force the exposed data to leak in a highly visible, undeniable manner, while simultaneously crippling the game's online functionality. The beauty of it, in a chillingly poetic way, was that it would be Thorne's own code, his own architecture, that would betray him. Orion wasn't injecting anything foreign. He was simply nudging Thorne's system to reveal what it was already doing. He spent long nights in the muted glow of his monitors, testing and retesting the sequence in isolated, sandboxed environments, simulating network conditions and data loads, observing its precise effect down to the millisecond. It was an intellectual exercise, a complex puzzle with incredibly high stakes. The hours blurred into days, fueled by a quiet focus that bordered on meditative. He wasn't driven by rage. Rage clouds judgment. He was driven by a cool, unyielding desire for justice, for the truth to be revealed, for the subtle rebalancing of a deeply imbalanced scale. Thorne was digging his own grave, and Orion was merely ensuring the shovel was well sharpened. He established a series of redundant, anonymous proxies, routing his connection through a labyrinth of servers across continents, ensuring that the source of the trigger could never be traced back to his machine or to him personally. Every step was deliberate, every contingency planned. He even considered the possibility of a desperate counterattack by Thorne's security teams, but the nature of the exploit, leveraging an internal flaw, meant the blame would inevitably fall on Nexus Gaming itself. He envisioned the exact moment of the launch, the global countdowns, the surge of millions of players attempting to connect, the triumphant press conferences. And then, the silence. The digital equivalent of a sudden, shattering silence. It wouldn't be a chaotic, messy explosion. It would be a precise, surgical strike, revealing the rot at the core of Thorne's empire. Thorne, blinded by his own hubris, saw nothing. He was too busy celebrating his perceived victory, completely unaware that the very foundation he stood upon was about to crumble. He had thought Orion's public humiliation was his ultimate triumph. He had no idea it was merely the opening act of his own, much more devastating, downfall. Orion had chosen his moment, and it was fast approaching. The launch day of Apex Dominion dawned with an almost unbearable tension, at least for Orion. For Thorne, it was a coronation. He had orchestrated a lavish global launch event, streamed live across multiple platforms, involving celebrity endorsements, a synchronized countdown, and a grand unveiling of the game's servers going live. The broadcast was slick, overproduced, bathed in the blinding light of ambition and corporate power. Orion watched from the quiet solitude of his apartment, a single cup of lukewarm tea beside him, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. The feed showed Thorne on stage, his face radiant with self-satisfaction, addressing a massive audience both in person and online. The roar of the crowd was almost deafening through the speakers. He spoke of his vision, his innovation, his unwavering commitment to his players, his words dripping with a practiced sincerity that Orion found nauseating. And now, Thorne boomed, his voice echoing through the speakers, amplified and distorted just enough to sound godlike. The moment you've all been waiting for. Apex Dominion is officially live. The crowd erupted in cheers, a wave of ecstatic sound washing over the arena. The countdown timer on screen hit 0. Millions of players worldwide simultaneously attempted to log in, creating an unprecedented surge of network traffic. This was it. Orion's fingers moved with practiced ease. It wasn't a frantic hack, but a deliberate, almost elegant deployment of a carefully constructed sequence. He initiated the trigger. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The live stream showed the Apex Dominion logo, pristine and triumphant, bathed in an artificial glow. The crowd continued to cheer, unaware. Then, a flicker, a slight stutter in the video feed, barely perceptible. Thorne, still basking in the applause, seemed to notice a slight hesitation from his technical team offstage. His triumphant smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in his impenetrable facade. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, perhaps from the heat of the stage lights, or perhaps from something else entirely. Then, the chaos began. Across the globe, Apex Dominion players attempting to log in were met not with the majestic login screen, but with a cascade of bizarre, unreadable error messages. Forums exploded with frustrated posts. Twitch streams, moments before filled with eager gamers, turned into live broadcasts of frozen screens and exasperated cries. But that was just the beginning. The exploit didn't merely crash the game. It forced Thorne's system to expose the very data it was so meticulously and unethically collecting. On the live stream, the Apex Dominion logo on the giant screen behind Thorne flickered, distorted, and then dissolved into a chaotic scroll of raw, unencrypted data. Not just game telemetry, but clearly identifiable personal information. Usernames linked to real names, IP addresses, geographical locations, even snippets of purchase history and browsing data, all flowing in a terrifying, undeniable torrent. The audience, initially confused, began to murmur, then to gasp as they too recognized the gravity of what they were seeing. The cheerful music playing in the background suddenly seemed macabre, a grotesque accompaniment to the unfolding digital horror. Thorne's face, a moment ago a picture of pure triumph, drained of all color. His eyes, fixed on the screen behind him, widened in horror. His jaw, previously set in a confident line, went slack. He tried to speak, but only a strangled gasp escaped his lips, his carefully rehearsed words swallowed by the rising tide of panic in the arena. The celebratory music faltered, grinding to a halt like a broken record. The stream, unable to cope with the sudden, anomalous data flood, started to pixelate, then freeze, before finally cutting out entirely, leaving a global audience in stunned silence. Orion watched it all unfold with a profound sense of detached satisfaction. There was no anger, no vindictive glee, just the quiet confirmation of a plan meticulously executed. He had known this moment would come. He had felt it in his bones. Thorne's empire wasn't crashing in a blaze of glory. It was crumbling from within, exposed by its own rotten core. He had built his success on the exploitation of others, and now, that very exploitation was his undoing. His carefully constructed facade of innovation and progress had been stripped away, revealing the ugly truth beneath. The public shaming Thorne had inflicted upon Orion was repaid in full, but this time, it was far more devastating, far more irreversible. And Thorne had done it to himself. All Orion did was pull back the curtain. The immediate aftermath of the Apex Dominion launch was a maelstrom of digital and corporate chaos. Thorne's carefully constructed empire began to unravel with breathtaking speed. The moment the live stream cut out, news outlets, initially covering the triumphant launch, pivoted immediately to the unfolding disaster. Screenshots and recordings of the data leaks spread like wildfire across social media, accompanied by outraged comments and calls for investigation. Hashtags like #ThorneExposed and #DataLeakDominion trended globally within minutes. Lawsuits began to surface within hours, first from individual players whose data had been exposed, then from privacy advocacy groups, and finally, from disgruntled investors who watched their stock plummet, shedding billions in market value in a single trading day. Nexus Gaming stock, once a bastion of stability, went into freefall. Analysts scrambled to understand the full extent of the architectural flaw and the ethical implications of the data collection. Thorne, in a desperate attempt to mitigate the damage, held a hastily arranged press conference, his usual sharp suits now seeming to hang loosely on his frame. His charisma had evaporated, replaced by a nervous tremor that ran through his voice. He stammered, denied, blamed unforeseen technical anomalies and malicious external actors, his eyes darting nervously, devoid of their usual confidence. He even tried to suggest a sophisticated state-sponsored attack, a desperate lie that crumbled under the weight of the undeniable evidence. But the data leak was too specific, too indicative of an internal mechanism, too perfectly aligned with the patterns Orion had observed for years. His denials only poured gasoline on the fire of public outrage. His company, once a symbol of industry might, became a pariah. Development teams, once loyal, began to resign en masse, their moral compasses finally outweighing their paychecks. Key partnerships dissolved, major retailers pulling Apex Dominion from their virtual shelves. The very foundation of Nexus Gaming, built on trust and a veneer of innovation, disintegrated. The investors who had laughed at Orion, who had dismissed his narrative-driven game in favor of Thorne's corporate juggernaut, were now reeling. He saw their faces on news segments, contorted with shock and regret, lamenting their losses and questioning their own judgment. Some even attempted to contact him, their tone now one of cautious respect, almost deference, a stark contrast to their previous dismissiveness. They offered belated apologies, thinly veiled attempts to salvage their own reputations, or perhaps even seek his expertise. Orion didn't return their calls. Their regrets were their own to bear. He harbored no ill will towards them, only a quiet understanding that they, like Thorne, had prioritized profit over principle. Thorne himself, once the epitome of success and power, became a pariah. His personal reputation, once unassailable, was tarnished beyond repair. He faced multiple class action lawsuits, regulatory investigations from data protection agencies around the world, and the scorn of an industry he had once dominated. He disappeared from public view, his social media accounts deactivated, his carefully curated image utterly destroyed. Rumors circulated of his company being forced into bankruptcy, of his personal assets being frozen, of a life spiraling into obscurity and legal battles. He was begging for mercy, not from Orion directly, but from the relentless, unforgiving force of consequence he had unleashed upon himself. Orion's own world, in the quiet aftermath, began to realign. The industry, initially shocked by Thorne's downfall, slowly started to revisit his Innovate-Con presentation, the one that had crashed so spectacularly. Without Thorne's manufactured narrative overshadowing it, people began to question why it had failed. The very public nature of Thorne's own technical collapse ironically led some to connect the dots. Whispers, then open discussions, began about the uncanny timing, the deliberate nature of the sabotage. While Orion never confirmed or denied anything, maintaining his characteristic silence, the narrative began to shift. His amateurish work was recast as a victim of ruthless corporate espionage, a testament to the lengths Thorne would go to eliminate competition. His quiet resilience was seen not as weakness, but as profound strength, a calculated patience that had ultimately triumphed. His game, the one he had poured his soul into, started to gain renewed attention. Independent critics revisited it, no longer swayed by the Innovate-Con fiasco, but by the burgeoning reputation of its creator. They discovered the depth, the innovation, the heart that Thorne had tried to bury. Reviews that had initially dismissed it now lauded its narrative complexity and emotional resonance. New investors, those who prioritized integrity and genuine artistic vision over fleeting trends, began to approach him. Not with the condescending pity he had once received, but with genuine interest and respect, drawn by his quiet strength and the sudden, undeniable proof of his technical genius. Months turned into a year. Thorne vanished completely from the public eye, his name synonymous with corporate malfeasance. Nexus Gaming was a ghost, its once shining offices now empty, a monument to a spectacular, self-inflicted collapse. Orion, on the other hand, found his work flourishing. His game, eventually released independently with the support of a small, ethical publisher who understood his vision, found its audience. It wasn't an overnight phenomenon, but it resonated deeply with those who valued narrative and craftsmanship. He built a small, dedicated team, composed of individuals who shared his values, creatives and technologists who believed in the art of gaming, and they continued to create, unburdened by corporate pressures or ethical compromises, their work defined by integrity and innovation. His life was no longer defined by the struggle for recognition, but by the quiet satisfaction of creating something meaningful, of contributing something genuine to the world. He had found his peace, not in grand gestures of revenge, but in the precise, strategic application of truth. The true victory wasn't just Thorne's downfall. It was the affirmation of his own path, his own values. It was the realization that integrity, quiet strength, and a deep understanding of the world, whether digital or otherwise, would always, eventually, triumph over arrogance and deceit. Remember this: when someone tries to dim your light, don't extinguish it. Instead, focus on sharpening your own unique brilliance. For in the end, it's not the loudest voice that wins, but the one that truly understands the hidden vulnerabilities of its opponents and possesses the patience to wait for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Your greatest strength might just be the quiet power they never saw coming. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on similar narratives. What part of Orion's journey resonated most with you? Do you believe silence can be a more powerful weapon than anger? Share your thoughts in the comments below.